Great. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, depending where in the world you are. Thank you so much for joining us for this third day of what has been an excellent Stimson Global Governance Forum. And I hope to maintain the standard that has been set by those who came before us in other events. It's really wonderful to be here, and I'd like to just welcome you to this session that we've called Reaching the Summit, Promoting the Potential of the UN75 Declaration. that is a play on the word summit, which is taking place on Monday. And on behalf of the co-sponsors, the Baha'i International Community, UN2020, and Together First, I have the great pleasure of welcoming you to this community-driven session at the Global Governance Forum. In many ways, today's event builds on the series of conversations these three organizations co-hosted actually in April and May as the UN75 declaration was taking shape. Whereas then we were discussing the content of the declaration, the question before us at this point is about next steps in its implementation. Over the past months, and especially 2 days, we've heard numerous proposals on how better global governance can help us respond to the current intersecting and cascading crises and set us on the path for a brighter, more sustainable future. Today, we will explore next steps in humanity's path towards these reforms. So for this session, I'll provide a few framing remarks, after which I'll turn the floor over to representatives of three leading civil society organizations and networks to discuss their proposals and thoughts on next steps. After this, we have the pleasure of listening to interventions from the co-facilitators of the member state-led process, Ambassadors Altani and Enesrom, for their responses to what they've heard, as well as their hopes, expectations, and suggestions on how we can advance the commitments outlined in the declaration. After their contributions, we will engage in a little bit of a call and response, hopefully, with the panelists. And finally, we are pleased to have Dr. Josh Lincoln here to help us make sense of the brilliance that we no doubt will have heard. Of course, as is the case with all of these sessions, an active chat box can allow us to have two events at the same time, one oral and the other written. So please do take advantage. And if you have any specific questions you would like to ask the panelists directly, please submit them through the Q&A function. And you can also upvote those questions that you like the most, and that makes it a little bit easier for us to crowdsource the most relevant questions. So on Monday, in just 3 days, the United Nations will commemorate its 75th anniversary. There are widespread expectations that this moment of stock-taking and reflection will also lead to much needed efforts to renew multilateralism. But in order for these expectations to be met, humanity must engage in the hard task of building increasing consensus around certain foundational issues. Far be it from me to summarize the full 2 previous days, but a few thoughts do bear mentioning here. First is that this community does not suffer from a lack of excellent ideas, a few of which may be mentioned in today's conversation. We are able to describe our challenges with increased sophistication and depth. We see that what was once viewed as an idealistic vision of international cooperation has in fact become a pragmatic necessity in light of the challenges we face. We recognize that our increasing interdependence is diminishing the utility of a pure state sovereignty model of global governance, and that there is a need to engage multiple stakeholders in the search for constructive solutions. We even recognize that leadership, trust, a global civic ethic, and political will need to be increasingly fostered at all levels if meaningful change is to come about. Yet despite these points of agreement, we are all searching for the path ahead, and the types of governance necessary have been equally unseen to us all. In this sense, regardless of the relative wisdom of any proposal, we must unify behind a process as much as a substance. History should be instructive for us here. At each stage of our collective history, more complex levels of integration become not only possible, but necessary. New and more pressing challenges emerge, and the body politic is compelled to devise new arrangements that address the needs of the time through greater inclusivity, coherence, and collaboration. The demands of the present moment are pushing existing structures for facilitating deliberations among nations, as well as systems of conflict resolution beyond their capacity for effectiveness. We therefore find ourselves at the threshold of a defining task, purposefully organizing our affairs in full consciousness of ourselves as one people in one shared homeland. So let's turn to the discussion before us today. Can the commitments in the declaration serve as a turning point for the global community? How do we build consensus around the wonderful ideas and proposals presented in this forum and elsewhere? And once we have consensus, how do we implement it? Like the United Nations rising from the ashes of World War II, our response to today's challenges has the potential to transform global governance to reflect a new reality. Collaboration is possible on scales undreamt of in past ages, opening unparalleled prospects for progress. On the eve of September 21st, we have an obligation to present and future generations to begin building the process towards an ambitious path ahead. This session will explore some of the steps needed to make this progressive vision a reality. So with that, in terms of introduction, I'll turn over the floor to Anissa Timory, who is a communications officer at Together First and the United Nations Association of the United Kingdom. So Anissa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dan, as ever. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, it's a pleasure to join you today to present Together First report, Stepping Stones for a Better Future. Together First is a network of people and organizations committed to building a fairer, safer, more resilient global system that works for all. Currently, we have over 190 NGOs from across the world in our coalition, and it's wonderful to be joining our partners from the Stimson Center and UN2020 for this discussion. The campaign was founded in 2018 to promote tangible steps towards the transformation we need to mitigate the risks that threaten humanity, and to advocate for the bold measures we need to ensure that our international system becomes more open, inclusive, fair, and effective. COVID-19 has exposed our underlying vulnerabilities, the deep inequalities within and between countries, the fragility of our systems and institutions, the lack of trust between people and governments, and the chasm between what politicians say and what they do. It has also made clear that, for better or worse, our world is deeply interconnected. In light of this, the UN Secretary General has called on world leaders to build back better. As governments lay the foundation for recovery, it is vital that they look beyond the immediate future. They must address other global catastrophic risks, such as the climate emergency, that have not disappeared during this crisis. And they must tackle the long-standing issues such as inequality that are undermining our resilience to future crises. Over 18 months, Together First worked with experts, advisors, and the public to find solutions to global governance issues that we believe this moment requires. We think that the history of failed reforms within our global system does not indicate that the ideas were not necessarily good enough, but rather there was a failure to implement them. So while our global consultation looked for good ideas, we mostly looked for good campaigns, in particular campaigns that we believed had reached a tipping point where one big push, which this UN75 process has the potential to give, could make a meaningful difference. So on our website, you'll find around 100 such ideas, but in our report, Stepping Stones for a Better Future, we have selected the 10 that we think fit the current moment. And you can find this report via the website or our social media. And the 10 recommendations set out in this report are anchored in a simple theory of change, one that holds 4 pillars. The first pillar, citizen engagement. The second, leadership and accountability. The third, peace and security. And the fourth, weapons governance. The first pillar, citizen engagement, aims to overcome the lack of trust in institutions by finding ways to strengthen participation, particularly for youth and civil society. So we propose here, we have 2 recommendations here. Firstly, a high-level champion for civil society, and secondly, a UN Youth Council. The second pillar, leadership and accountability, seeks to boost confidence that reform is possible. And building on best practice and positive examples of change, we can make progress and better align with the aims of multiple stakeholders. So here we have proposals, merits-based appointments, and secondly, accountability for state violations of planetary boundaries. The third pillar, peace and security, goes to the heart of our international system, one that is founded on the promise to protect future generations from the scourge of war. It is in this area where failures are most tragic and most visible. So the proposals here build on the themes of inclusion and accountability to change the parameters of power, particularly in relation to preventing and responding to crises. Here we have 4 recommendations. The first, a Security Council that acts or gets out of the way. The second, a stronger peacebuilding commission. Third, people-centered peacekeeping, and fourth, an integrated approach to climate and security. The fourth and final pillar, weapons governance, champions two campaigns that we believe act as a proof of concept to show that we can create the sort of changes we want to see. They have been selected because they address two existential risks: emerging technologies and weapons of mass destruction. They are a ban on killer robots and a ban on nuclear weapons. But as we say in our report, even if all 10 of these ideas were implemented, we would only be at the start of the journey towards the radical reforms that both the current moment and future crises require. We believe these 10 ideas represent stepping stones towards that better future, but our work is just beginning. The 75th anniversary must be the launch pad for the urgent action we need for a safer and fairer world, for the UN we want, and the UN we need to lead us there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anissa. That's a wonderful overview of some really important and meaningful steps forward. And I do like the challenge of this being just the start. So I will turn straight over to Jeff Huffines, who's Senior Advisor at UN 2020 and Together First, to discuss a little bit the work that he's been engaged in for the past many years. Go ahead, Jeff. I've unmuted you.
Oh, you have unmuted me, thank you. All right, well, thank you, Dan. I'd really like to focus on some of the next step and practical advances following our engagement this week in this amazing UN75 Global Governance Forum. You know, and based upon the roadmaps from member states, from the United Nations, from civil society, we have three legs of a stool upon which to chart our future course in the months and years ahead. Of course, from member states, we will have the UN75 Political Declaration to be adopted next week. From the Secretariat, we have the SG's report on global conversation, which he will offer next Monday. And then, of course, we have the Secretary General's follow-up report mandated by the Political Declaration. And on behalf of civil society, we have the UN75 People's Declaration from UN 2020, the Together First Stepping Stones report, and this UN75 roadmap for the future we want and the UN we need, based upon this exercise we've been engaged upon these past several days. Now, regarding the UN75 People's Declaration, we were indeed fortunate to have Dan volunteer his services as a coordinator for the drafting of the UN75 People's Declaration beginning in February. And out of this consultative process with members of civil society worldwide, there emerged a number of advocacy and messages organized by UN 2020 partner organizations and Together First to influence the negotiations of the UN75 Political Declaration that included a communique in advance of the elements paper, followed by a response to the UN75 elements paper produced by the co-facilitators that culminated in the adoption of the UN75 People's Declaration at the UN75 People's Forum on May 14th and the 15th. Now, just a review of some elements of the declaration. First, it opens with the historic opportunity before us, in that this year holds the potential to serve as a crucial turning point in our trajectory towards a world of shared prosperity based on commitments made. And like the United Nations arising from the ashes of World War II, our response to this challenge has the potential to transform global governance to reflect a new reality. This declaration offered a few key demands. One of them is that the time has come to launch an ambitious, nonpartisan, transparent, and inclusive process to identify global governance gaps and develop a coherent strategy to fill them. I think this is our immediate task before us now. Moreover, civil society's constructive voice needs to be heard and included by protecting the fundamental freedoms of assembly, association, and expression. And finally, member states, the UN, and all stakeholders must take bold action based on the recognition of our shared destiny and to work to create global institutions that reflect and respond to this reality. There were three principal recommendations for member states in the United Nations specifically in the declaration. One was to establish a mandated post-2020 follow-up mechanism to enhance global governance. Second, to reliably, increasingly fund the United Nations. And third, to enhance civil society and other stakeholders' participation modalities, which includes a joint exercise with UN2020, Together First, and the Stimson Center in a UN75 partnership initiative dedicated to the appointment of a civil society focal point at the UN Secretariat. Moreover, our declaration included an annex of immediate actions, medium-term proposals, and long-term aspirations. Our immediate next step is that we are launching an eminent persons letter that offers a framework for next steps for member states. The signatories include former presidents, prime ministers, UN officials, and foreign ministers, including Mary Robinson, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, Danilo Turk, Ban Ki-moon, and others. The key demand to be made by these eminent persons include the following. One is asking heads of state to acknowledge and recognize the need to support the indispensable role of the United Nations while at the same time strengthen and reform the legal and institutional machinery of the United Nations system. And two, to call for a dedicated intergovernmental process to pursue this goal in the follow-up to the UN75 declaration. Along these lines, we very much endorse the Stimson Center's UN 2.0 proposed roadmap to 2023. We look forward to the opportunity in the weeks ahead to really engage in a consultation on the steps recommended in that report. And moreover, we noted some of the recommendations made in these last couple of days, including the idea of a stock-taking exercise to be conducted by the President of the General Assembly in advance of the Secretary General's follow-up report. And also Maria Fernanda Espinosa offered the idea of a multilateralism innovation lab that perhaps can be developed as a part of the follow-up process ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And without delay, we will turn straight over to Christina Petku, who is a research associate at the Stimson Center, which is an organization that you may have heard of. You may have even had the benefit of seeing her face and hearing her voice at many of these meetings. We look forward to hearing from you. Christina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dan. And I'll take a moment just to share my PowerPoint presentation. Let's see if it's working. Is it working on your side?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful. All right, well, thank you, Dan. And I would also like to thank the Baha'i international community for its leadership in organizing the civil society breakfast meetings back in the spring to discuss the UN75 declaration draft. I think it was a useful exercise. And as you said, in many ways, this event is a continuation of those. But now with a focus on taking the declaration further. And with high hopes for the leadership and skill of an emerging new broad-based coalition of governments and civil society networks to drive change, the Stimson Center offered in its latest report, UN 2.0, 10 Innovations for Global Governance, UN 75 Years Beyond San Francisco. It offered 8 practical guidelines for actors committed to embracing and pursuing a more advanced approach to global cooperation. I invite you all to read all of them in the report, but for this presentation, I'll only refer to 4 of them. And I would very much like to hear the ambassadors' reflections on these guidelines, especially as they relate to questions of feasibility, how do we implement them, and is there anything else that you'd recommend civil society does to take the UN75 declaration further? So let me turn my slide so that you can easily see the 4 guidelines. So the first one is to comment the UN75 declaration's strengths and unique contributions while critiquing constructively its shortcomings, especially giving the opportunities for civil society engagement in the UN75 declaration negotiations, and now its follow through. State and non-state partners should strike a skillful balance between highlighting the declaration's merits and where it fell flat, and it failed to confront today's monumental challenges. So building on the momentum generated by the declaration, further political support and commensurate financial resources are needed to ensure a growing rather than shrinking space for civil society in global decision-making, and to safeguard against any backsliding in support of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, as championed over the past 2 decades at major UN anniversaries. The second one would be to support actively a new expert advisory group on inclusive governance. Since effective and durable change cannot be achieved in a single high-level meeting or a single year of UNGA deliberations, the UN75 declaration calls upon, and I quote here, the Secretary General to report back before the end of the 75th session of the General Assembly with recommendations to advance our common agenda and respond to current and future challenges. So what we're proposing is that this expert advisory group could examine how the entire global governance system, not just the United Nations, can be better organized and equipped to address major current and emerging challenges and opportunities facing the international community, giving special attention to how the international system can best foster a durable and just economic, social, and environmental recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Members of the expert advisory group should include a representative, of course, of civil society, parliamentarians, scholars, and policy researchers, and even former leaders of global institutions. The third, and connected to the previous recommendation, is to design and advocate a World Summit on Inclusive Global Governance that is held no later than September 2023. To advance a post-2020 agenda and alongside single institution and issue-focused reform efforts, the expert advisory group that I just mentioned earlier should propose a World Summit on Inclusive Global Governance to usher in a new compact for renewed global governance and to rebuild trust in global institutions. The proposed World Summit on Inclusive Global Governance would serve as a culmination of a 2-year multi-continent preparatory process. And let me show you the last slide of my presentation so that you actually see a little bit the timeline that we're proposing. It should be viewed as a direct extension and fulfillment of the UN75 declaration's vision and commitments. The outcome document of the summit and its preparatory process, let's call it a 2023 summit's plan of action, should strive to increase participation in global decision-making, enhance the legitimacy, effectiveness, and accountability of global institutions, and strengthen the rules-based global order. And the fourth one would be to redouble efforts to scale up and extend the reach of the Alliance for Multilateralism, UN2020, and Together First, with an emphasis on skillful communications and advocacy. To the degree to which like-minded governments and global civil society organizations are mobilized will in large part determine the level of success of the proposed 2023 World Summit on Global Governance and its preparatory process. In particular, the Alliance for Multilateralism, UN2020, and Together First are needed to work together to ensure that good ideas are put into action through skillful political maneuvering, buttressed by a robust communications and advocacy strategy that maximizes technology for meaningful public outreach. So further scaling up their size and global reach would also help to expand their collective credibility and influence over future negotiations. So these smart coalitions of governments and civil society would create the right balance between decision-making authority, innovative ideas, and advocacy that could subsequently translate into greater influence, credibility, and chances for shepherding proposals beyond UN75. And some initial steps about how to advance this coalition can be found on page 54 of the report. So I won't go into those, but I'll leave that there to you. So I'll stop here for now and turn to you, Dan. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Christina. And as you may have seen in the chat box, people are very interested in having this handy dandy chart at their disposal. So I'm sure you will make that available. There are also a couple of questions coming in on the Q&A. And before we turn over to the ambassadors to hear their reflections on this topic, I would encourage the panelists to just have a look and maybe think about responses to these questions, either good examples of citizen engagement that you've seen, or this question of political will that has come up in the chat box. If you start ruminating on those issues, then you can be better prepared when I turn to you and feel less like I am attacking you. So with that, I do have the great honor of turning the floor over to Ambassador Al-Thani, who's the permanent representative of Qatar to the United Nations. And she was one of the co-facilitators for the UN75 declaration. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on where we are and where we can potentially go. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and good morning, everyone. I wanted to, of course, to begin by thanking the Simpson Center and the UN 2020 and Together First for inviting us to this very engaging panel discussion on the aspirations of the UN 75th anniversary. Let me begin, of course, by saying a few words on the issue that is of the center of attention, the political declaration on UN 75 that on Monday it will be endorsed by our head of states and governments. The declaration, of course, presents a positive vision for enhanced global cooperation to respond to the greater challenges, risks, and opportunities of the present era, including, of course, the rapidly changing global climate, violence, and large-scale displacement in fragile states, sophisticated cybersecurity threats, and, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, and its devastating social and economic consequences. The declaration, of course, acknowledges, as you have all read, the achievements, but as well, achievements by the UN, but as well, it states that there were moments of disappointment, such as the growing inequality, poverty, among other major issues. The key aspects of the declaration, as you all know, that the 193 UN member states on Monday will endorse this declaration, including the 12 commitments for action across the United Nations global agenda, including leaving no one behind, protecting our planet, promoting peace and preventing conflicts, abiding by international law and ensuring justice, keeping women and girls at the center of our global work, building trust, improving digital cooperation, upgrading the UN, which addresses the reform of the United Nations questions, and of course ensuring sustainable financing, which you have clearly pointed out earlier today, boosting partnership with the partners, including, of course, the global civil society movements, listening to the young people, and finally, but not least, responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and future health crises. For each of the 12 commitments, of course, the declaration outlines the most critical and pressing issues before us and before the international community, and points to the need for us to take action by strengthening international cooperation in the interest of both nations and the peoples. For example, under peace and prevention of conflicts, the declaration calls for the diplomatic toolbox of the UN Charter needs to be used to its full potential, including preventive diplomacy and mediation. The declaration also calls on the Secretary General to enhance this toolbox to prevent the outbreak, escalation, and the recurrence of hostilities on land, at sea, in space, and in cyberspace. Also taking into account the declaration represents the first major statement and commitment by member states to address the COVID-19 pandemic by working together to build back better. UN member states, of course, agreed that we should not neglect our past international commitments, and of course, namely the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Again, the endorsement of the UN 75th Declaration next Monday by our world leaders presents an opportunity for institutional renewal. It further offers a chance to chart a path to the partnerships we need to meet the challenges we will face in the years and decades to come. The declaration, of course, if acted upon by all member states and with the support of the global civil society, can inject a renewed spirit of global cooperation with two mutually reinforcing goals, namely institutional strengthening and a robust of green recovery from the pandemic. Just let me end on a special note. Of course, the UN 75th Declaration concluding section is very key in terms of what you have earlier mentioned, the follow-up means, the means of following up on the 12 commitments that will be endorsed on Monday. And of course, in that, we have requested the Secretary General to report back before the end of the 75th session of the General Assembly with specific recommendations to advance the declaration's common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges. This critical concluding language to the declaration will help ensure that the best minds within the UN system, within the global civil society movements, are put together and mobilized to put forward, in close consultations, of course, with member states and civil society, effective follow-up through action plans to ensure the full realization of the declaration positive vision and 12 concrete commitments. Daniel, I will stop here, and of course my dear colleague and Karen will definitely have many important points to add to this very important timely panel.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Al-Thani. As always, a wonderful summary with some very important vision for what can and should be done, with some sobering assessments on how we've gotten here. So we're very grateful to you for that contribution. And of course, we'll turn over the floor to Ambassador Enestrom, who is the permanent representative of Sweden to the United Nations. And she was, of course, Ambassador Al-Thani's co-facilitator. Ambassador Enestrom, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and I'm honored to be part of this meeting today, and I'm very impressed of the work that you put in, and I appreciate very much the work that you and your colleagues are putting into this extremely important process that I think we have just started, as many have said. But we hope very much will lead to a stronger and more efficient and inclusive UN. So I'd like to thank you and the organizers for this meeting and for all the work that you have put in to it. Just to say first that, I mean, I could not agree more than with my dear colleague, Ambassador Alia. We have worked very closely together with this declaration, and she has set out very much the main parts of the declaration. So I hope that I can be a bit brief on my intervention, and looking forward to the questions. Let me first say that how important it is with the engagement of civil society, and I mean this was clear from the declaration. I mean, I also, of course, come from a country who is very much promoting the inclusion of civil society, not only within the UN, but when it comes to decision making all over the world. We not only count on, but we are also dependent on the voice of civil society. And I'd like to thank you for the work that we have done together during this process of putting the declaration together. We have, both Alia and myself have participated in meetings with you, both smaller and larger, and you have also passed on proposals to us that have been really good for and helpful for our process. Can I also thank those that have presented the different reports that we have received before this meeting. I think that there are lots of very, very interesting proposals in these reports, both when it comes to substantive proposals, but also on the process and the roadmap forward. I think many of them are actually mirroring what is in the declaration and will support the implementation of the declaration. I'm thinking of the accountability. I'm thinking about the inclusion. I'm thinking about the institutions and governance, and many of the other proposals that is in the declaration. But I think that you have brought up and put into more context, which I think is very good. I think what you're saying about a more accountable Security Council is important. I think also, and maybe even more, the strengthening of the Peace Building Commission, which can work more broadly with the building peace agenda. If I can just say three things about the declaration, because Alja has already laid out very much the content of the declaration. Maybe to say that it's really speaking to the people, and this has been our objective from the start. And this is also why we choose to have a language that is not the normal sort of repetition of already agreed language from the UN, but making that more forward-looking, more easy to understand, not repeating what we have already said. Secondly, that this is really a strong manifest for multilateralism. And we're very happy that we could achieve that, because as you know, there has been a lot of discussions about should we go the national way or should we go the multilateral international cooperation way? And I think this is a testament to that member states have actually chosen the multilateral way, which is important for the future. It's also very strong when it comes to certain areas that you have mentioned: the human rights, the democracy, the conflict prevention, the climate action, the importance of youth, the rule-based international order. And I think the inclusive UN is something that we really need to build for the future. And then the third point, and I'm just coming from a meeting with the Secretary General and heads of state that I've listened into on the SDG moment. I think one of the most important parts in this declaration is that it says that we already have the tools. So this is, we should not invent everything that we already have. We have the Agenda 2030 and we have the Paris Agreement. These are here for us to implement. And we really, this is urgent. We are going backwards when it comes to some of the SDGs. So here, member states have also said that they will use unprecedented political will. So here I think we all need to work together that these action plans that we already have will actually be put into reality. I think it's also important to look at the declaration as a whole. They have these 12 commitments, which all of them are important in themselves, but you need to look at this as setting an agenda, a common agenda for the challenges of today and even more important for tomorrow. And of course, here we have the recommendations that the Secretary General will implement, but I would also point at that the General Assembly and the President of the General Assembly has also an important role when it comes to the implementation of the commitments in the declaration. And I think that, I mean, you have already been inspired, and I think we should all be inspired about what we have achieved in this declaration, and we should put it now into work. And I think the inspiration that you are giving through your reports will certainly help that process. And I mean, I come from a member states, and we will certainly, as a national member state, but also as part of the UN member states collective, support both the PGA and the General Secretary General when it comes to the implementation and setting the agenda for the future. And in this, we count very much on the support of civil society, and we do look forward to continue to working very closely with you as we implement this declaration. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador Enestrom. And we are happy to continue with this partnership. And we're very grateful to you and to Ambassador Al-Thani for all of the opportunities for engagement that you have created for us over the past months, and looking forward to it in the future. So we have a number of questions in the chat box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to direct a few at various panelists. But first I want to take care of a couple of the hot potatoes that maybe have come up, because there are these things that have arisen in many of the spaces over the past couple of days. And I want to find a way to address them, without getting lost in them. So these are items like the UN Parliamentary Assembly, which I see has been upvoted a number of times, and the issue of the veto power of 5 member states. And I think what we have to be considering with all of these ideas is that there are many excellent ideas, and there are many even challenges and problems at the UN. And we actually are equal in that we don't know what is going to work. But we have to be experimental. We have to be thinking critically about new options. I think the UNPA is, and I'm sure all of us think it's a really interesting proposal. But there are, of course, risks associated with it, not least the challenge of actually getting it to happen. But even if it does happen, we have seen issues with the elections, direct elections, and all of this. But I think in terms of an idea, it's wonderful. And the same goes for Security Council reform. This has been an issue that has been on the agenda of the UN for roughly 75 years. And I don't think in this morning's conversation we're going to be able to solve it, but it is one of those things that we have to always bear in mind as we're engaging in the conversation. And so what I hope we can do is really think about the next steps towards unpacking some of these issues rather than really focusing on them in particular. And with that, I'll ask a couple of questions to the panelists that are based on what is in the chat box. So for Christina, I would like to ask you about practical examples of citizen engagement that have been effective. And this is a question from Gary Roosh. I'm sure I mispronounced it. He can let me know how to do it properly. About what have we seen that has allowed for constructive citizen engagement where you really felt like your voice has been heard and really change is being made. For Jeff, I'd like to ask to draw a little bit on your experience. What are some examples you've seen where political will has been generated? How can we replicate those? How can we really find ways to tap into the good leadership qualities that are necessary that have been referenced in a number of these questions, sometimes in the face of growing powers not demonstrating the kinds of leadership we want? And how can we encourage these small and medium-sized nations to perhaps take on some of that responsibility in the face of these challenges? And I want to draw on your experience for that question, Jeff, but I also think Anissa, who has conducted a number of these global consultations around these kinds of issues, I'm sure that she has also found some insights related to this. And then lastly, for the ambassadors, you are welcome to handle any of the questions that you see. Hopefully some of the thoughts generated by the comments of our civil society colleagues can inspire you to share some of your reflections. So we'll take it in that order: Christina, Jeff, and then Anissa. So Christina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the questions as well. I think, responding to your question related to civic engagement and what are some of the good practices that we've seen over the past few months in terms of civic engagement in the UN75 consultation, but also more broadly, civil society getting together to discuss the draft, what was before a draft of the UN75 declaration. And I'm thinking right now about 3 things in particular. One of them, of course, is the UN75 global governance that it's being led by the Secretary General. And I think this time around the UN has been smart enough, the UN is smart in general, but this time around I think in particular was creative, maybe I should say, enough to think about listening to the people instead of telling them what to do. And I think that it engaged in this listening in also in a creative way. Of course, it engaged through technology. There's a survey that they've put together, and I think that there's 1 million people that contributed so far. But also through dialogues and all the feedback that these dialogues had was able to be submitted to the UN75 office and therefore be reflected in the UN75 report, which is actually going to be published and presented at the World Leader Summit on Monday. The second would be, of course, civic engagement was possible through the global coalitions that we have created, the global civil society coalitions that we've created, and that's, of course, UN2020 and Together First. We've had some tremendous positive feedback in terms of the way we have been able to engage civil society from all across the world. Of course, COVID somehow also allowed us in a way or another to make better use of technologies. And rethink engagement. Of course, we still have to bridge the digital divide that it's still not allowing us to reach too many more people. And the third one that I'm thinking, it's what has been also the focus of the UN75 global conversation is youth engagement. But youth engagement, I think this time around was, it's starting to be reshaped and rethought as an intergenerational dialogue that needs to happen. So not necessarily a dialogue that happens among young people that stays there and it's not being brought to the decision-making table or to the decision makers, but an intergenerational approach that allows listening and feedback that goes two ways. Yeah, I'll leave it there with these 3 points.
Thank you so much, Christina. Jeff?
Am I unmuted? Yes.
Now you're good. Now you're good.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Dan, for that question. I mean, when you look into the last 40 years or so, there have been a number of international campaigns that have led to concrete achievements. For example, there is the International Criminal Court, which came out of an initiative, the Coalition for the International Criminal Court, an alliance with middle powers and small powers, that brought the Rome Statute into being. And so this was despite the opposition of some of the larger powers. The same is true with the Ottawa Treaty that on the prohibition of landmines. And I would say even more recently, we have the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And so these are examples whereby international civil society, together with the United Nations and middle powers, demonstrated an ability to utilize the instrument of multilateralism to effect change. And so in a similar fashion, we really would like to look at this proposal made by the Simpson Center to advance a smart coalition of UN 2020 Together First and perhaps the Alliance for Multilateralism, to identify those states who would be willing to work with us to advance the global governance piece of the declaration. Because while I think we would all be in agreement that it is very important that member states commit themselves to fulfilling the promises they have already made, I think it goes without saying that the United Nations machinery is in serious need of an update. So in this regard, we would like to work with like-minded member states to develop the proposals that have been made by the partnership initiatives that we've learned about these last few days, and also in the innovation track, and see how far we can take this. I think we would all agree that hopefully humanity is at a point in its maturity whereby we should be able to move the needle forward without having global crisis compel us to do so.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Anissa, what say you to that question?
Thank you, Dan, and thanks, Jeff, for that as well. I think that the kind of point that question makes me think about is coming back to some of the points the ambassadors have both made themselves about the kind of process that was even undertaken to get this declaration to a final draft that is still a final document that is still forward-looking and is hopeful, and is one that is inspiring and recommits member states to multilateralism at a time where we know and we hear time and time again that multilateralism is under threat. And so I think that yes, the questions of political will arise, but if COVID has shown us anything, if this UN75 process has shown us anything, is that we know that multilateralism is the answer, it's the way forward. It is better to try and we have to have an international coordinated response to COVID rather than 193 separate responses. And that's why the follow-up mechanism, the kind of the outline, the very specific line in the declaration that commits the Secretary General to report back at the end of the 75th session with the recommendations, with a reform agenda, is really vital. And the best thing that we can do is use this, as we've said time and time again, as the launch pad, the real kind of trigger for meaningful change. And I think that that's why, for us, one of the proposals that we had a chance to present yesterday, we see around creating a civil society focal point at the United Nations, for example, is an opportunity to kind of act as a catalyst for that change by bringing in other voices, by having people at the decision-making table beyond just member states, to allow for that collaborative and diverse and innovative approach that we really need in this moment. But that was what I really wanted to say to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anissa. I think that there are significant lessons to be learned from the current experience, especially as we see other crises sort of coming before us. This claim that we cannot raise the funds, that there are not enough resources, has sort of been undermined by the responses we've seen around the world, where resources have been found in times of crisis. And one of the questions I think we need to be confronting is, how can we encourage our governments, and how can our governments themselves feel enabled to tap into those resources for more long-term crises and more intransigent issues that we're trying to confront. We have the advantage that COVID-19 is right in front of our nose. You can't avoid it. But some of these other ones are a little bit beneath the surface. And so I'm hoping I can turn to our dear ambassadors to ask if they have any thoughts on either what you are learning from either this process or from history that can be used into the future, or even recommendations explicitly for the hundreds or hopefully thousands of civil society members who will be listening to this and trying to engage over the course of the coming 1 to 5 years. I think I'll give the floor first to Ambassador Al-Thani, just to continue that tradition. I hope you don't mind. Ambassador Al-Thani.
Thank you, Daniel. And again, I wanted to thank all of the distinguished speakers, Christina and Yassi and Jeff. I think what I wanted to mention at this point of time, I think we really admire this process has really brought together a very strong engagement, between the United Nations member states and the global civil society movement. I think your engagement from day one with us as co-facilitators, myself and Anna Karen, was very, very helpful. Anna has stressed that overall earlier. I mean, since day one, we've been welcomed by you. You've really, the events you've organized with us, the engagement, providing input to the previous drafts was very helpful in terms of coming up with an exceptional way of looking at things and defining partnership between the UN and the global civil society movement. And again, of course, as the speakers have said as well, the UN today has showed a very much different means of engagement with young people and the global civil society movement by listening and acknowledging and engaging. And I think the Secretary General approach by creating the global conversation, the inputs, the wealth of information we got from the global civil society movement, young people, was tremendous. I mean, in terms of richness, structure, and I believe this is something that will continue. And I think one of the speakers mentioned the idea of creating more of a focal point in terms of continuing the engagement. I think this is key. We will definitely support it. Qatar and Sweden are among those countries that continue to see more progressive engagement of civil society. We know there is still resistance by, minority of countries, but I think we've progressed a lot. I mean, the last 10 years, I've been around at the United Nations and I've seen the change, the shift. And I really also, I want to give credit to Secretary General Guterres. I think since he came, I think, his predecessor, Ban Ki-moon, of course, he was a strong supporter of civil society engagement, but I think Guterres made it more structured and more, with more a sense of continuity. And I think your ideas in terms of creating those sort of an advisory group to support the UN in terms of follow-up, I mean, please use the opportunity of the Secretary General report that will come up before the end of the session. Continue the engagement, continue feeding into the process. I know that we've tried our best to come up with a more structured, formal mechanism of follow-up, but of course we were not able to achieve that, but we planted the seed. The seed is there, and I think we can build on it through giving structured recommendations to the Secretary General that he will share with the membership, with the wider membership, and with the key partners, including global civil society movements. I think we still have the chance to have more of a structured means of follow-up. But let's work together and let's not miss these opportunities this year while the Secretary General prepare for setting up these specific recommendations. I'll stop here. I'm sorry to prolonging.
No, it was wonderful to listen to. Thank you so much. Ambassador Enestra.
Thank you, Daniel. Maybe 3 points from my side. I mean, you asked for our sort of what experience and lessons learned have we done from this process that we can use for the future. I think one very important one that we have mentioned before is that if member states come together, especially during a crisis, they can achieve a change. And I think that this declaration shows that. It is a strong declaration, and we just now need to keep pushing that political will also show in its implementation. The second thing I wanted to say is that I think there are many things when you look at what the UN is today and what it will need to be in the future. I think one of the most important part of that is that it needs to be more inclusive. And this is really a chance for civil society, private sector, other actors to work together with the UN. We will not be able to achieve the sustainable development goals or any of the other parts that are now in our common agenda if we do not work together. I mean, you mentioned financing. And financing, we see that there might, or the predictions are that the ODA will go down. There are many countries that have enormous pressures right now because of COVID and other things. And there we need to work together with the private sectors and others to ensure that we will have the financing for the UN. I mean, Ali and I come from countries who are huge contributors to the UN system and to the UN system, especially on the ground. But this is not the case with everyone. And so I think we really need to look at this inclusive way of working together. And the third thing I wanted to say, and I'm picking up a bit what Jeff said about that the civil society together with member states can really make a change. And he brought up some very good examples, which have been processes that emerge from civil society, and then in partnership with member states have actually made a success. So I think this needs to continue, and we hope that you will continue to be a nail in the eyes of us. And we will certainly work with you. But I think your role in pushing the member states continues both in your sort of constituencies and with national governments and countries. but also in New York with the UN and us working here continues to be very important. And as Alia, I think this idea about having a focal point is a very good one. So let's see how we together can strengthen the role of civil society, but also other actors in order to make the UN stronger, and especially making it possible for us to deliver to the peoples. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One theme that seems to be emerging is that nothing is quite so simple, and it's going to take time and collaboration and really constructive engagement. And we actually have a special guest who we will give the floor to, the former UN Legal Counsel, Hans Corell. I would just love to know his thoughts and reflections on what he's heard thus far, and perhaps even further considerations on what's to be done from here. So Mr. Corell, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for giving me the floor. I've listened with great interest to your interventions here and the whole work that you've been engaged in over such a long period. It is so important. I was a legal counsel for 10 years, 3 years with Boutros Ghali and 7 years with Kofi Annan. And my experiences from this time is that the rule of law and democracy are absolutely necessary to have a world in peace. And I think the efforts that you are now making, including the civil society and so forth, are so important. But my concern is that the members of the United Nations, the member states, are not always bowing to the law that they have promised to follow. And this is particularly serious when this is done by members of the Security Council, and specifically by the permanent 5 members. So I sat in a chat where I sent a link to my latest contribution to the need for reform of the Security Council, which is entitled Security Council Reform. The Council must lead by example. I think it's extraordinary to see how they sometimes behave. And it's very interesting that Professor Jennifer Trahan has just published a book where she's analyzing the veto cast by members of the Security Council. And she has come to the conclusion that there are situations where the veto is actually contrary to international law and trumps their veto right in the UN Charter. So I recommend that this book is discussed seriously now in the United Nations, because there are 3 situations she's referring to, and that is Joost Kogan's, the absolute necessary rules that you must always follow in international law. Secondly, the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Those cannot be violated. And thirdly, provisions in treaties where you are obliged to follow the treaty and prosecute, for example, Article 1 in the Genocide Convention. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, and thank you for allowing me to take the floor here. I would also like to make reference to another publication that was generated by a comment by former Chancellor Helmut Schmidt in Germany. He was 90 years old in a meeting where I was participating, and I started talking about the rule of law. And he says, I wonder if politicians understand their responsibility for the rule of law. That generated a guide elaborated by 2 institutes, the Wallenberg Institute in Sweden and the Hill Institute in the Netherlands. And this guide is only some 50 pages, and it is freely available for downloading and printing from the web. And it doesn't cost anything. That was my idea from the beginning. It should cost nobody. Nobody should pay for it. They should get it free. And just Google rule of law, a guide for politicians, and you will find it. And there are 25 translations, and I'm just waiting for 1 translation into Urdu and 1 translation into Indian. So I hope that this will be spread. But thank you for giving me the floor, and also I wish you all the best in your important work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear from you. I mean, certainly there's nothing that can be achieved. Not everything can be achieved in 1 hour, but really having this opportunity for exchanging good resources and information is really helpful. And I think the rule of law, I mean, it cannot be understated. We are all, a functioning citizenry is dependent upon these agreed rules of law that we are all, loyal to. And if we are not loyal to that rule of law, it's going to be very difficult to see how humanity can progress justly. So what I'll do now is I'll turn back to the panelists for perhaps one final intervention before asking Dr. Joshua Lincoln to have his intervention. So we'll start with Christina, as I know she has another meeting to attend to, and unfortunately Ambassador Al-Thani has already had to take her leave. So Christina, you have the floor.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess everything that I could say, and probably Jeff is also going to support this, and Anissa as well, is that currently as civil society, we are trying to come together with a strategy for supporting the Secretary General's follow-up. And we know that there is definitely a lot of room for thought in that area, as Sheikha Alia Al-Thani, Ambassador of Qatar, said. It was just planting the seeds. So now it's up to us, civil society, to take this farther. And for those of you who attended yesterday's Global Governance Forum, Day 2, Mrs. Espinosa, Mrs. Maria Fernanda Espinosa, which was the 73rd President of the General Assembly, mentioned, as Jeff said, that we should create a multilateralism innovation lab or incubator. So probably what I suppose I'm trying to say here is that we hope that many of you will try to support us in this endeavor, in basically trying to find a path forward to implement some of these reform proposals. And we know, of course, definitely that some of them are not feasible in this current political context, but nevertheless, hope should not be should not be lost. And we should at least try to garner political support for some of the proposals that actually seem appealing to some of our decision makers. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Christina. I will turn to Anissa and then Jeff.
Thank you, Dan. I'm really not sure there's much more for me to add at this point. I think that a lot has been said, and I think I can only make it clear again that we're excited for this next step. It sometimes feels like we're in a time where there is little hope, but I think that actually this UN75 process has really invigorated this necessary conversation, and unfortunately the crises that we're facing from COVID and the fallout from COVID that is kind of yet to be even realized is hopefully just a reminder for people for the action that's necessary and the real kind of change and progress we need to make for these next steps. And again, I think that this declaration is an important starting point for that process, and I look forward to working with all of you and the people that have joined us for the last 2 days of this forum, joined us throughout this year for the different dialogues that have happened, and we look forward to the report being released on Monday, and yeah, let it be the launch pad for the change that we really need. And thank you, Dan, as ever.
Thank you, Anissa. Jeff, your 1 minute summary.
Sorry, just reflecting for a moment on the wisdom of Hans Corell. I'm reminded of the historian Thucydides, who said that while the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And it is an unfortunate fact, we still live in a world of realpolitik, geopolitical struggle, where it's very unfortunate that it's the strongest among us who are most heedless when it comes to the rule of law. And I think we're living in a challenging moment in that regard. Indeed, I was quite struck by what Ban Ki-moon had to say during the Global Governance Forum, where he pointed out that it was particularly worrying that the P5 have most failed in their obligations to pursue non-proliferation, which risks the NPT promise. He also strongly admonished the current president of the United States as being short-sighted, irresponsible, immoral, and wrong, and that the US should reconsider its current approach regardless of the outcome of the presidential election and show genuine global leadership once again to confront the existential threats that confront us. So I would say, in terms of what we as civil society and our responsibility, despite all the evidence to the contrary, we must hold fast to the narrative that a new world is possible. And against the rising tide of xenophobia and rank nationalism, we as civil society must continue to hold member states accountable to the principles, ideals, and standards of the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the promises they have made in this UN75 declaration.
Thank you, Jeff. Ambassador Enestrom, I don't know if you have any further words you'd like to add.
Daniel, just three quick things. First, to say thank you very much, and to encourage you to stay as active and creative as you always are. Secondly, to agree very much with everything's been said, that this is the start of a process, and let's continue to work together. And the third thing is to Hans Corell, who, as always, is right. I just want to say how much I agree with him on the importance of rule of law and democracy, and how happy we were to have strong language in the declaration on this, not least since we are seeing many countries going backwards when it comes to democracy. So again, thank you so much, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We'll now turn to Joshua Lincoln, who's Senior Fellow at Fletcher Center for International Law and Governance and a board member of the Global Governance Forum, a different Global Governance Forum. Sometimes I try to wrap up these events, but I thought that there's no way I would be able to do so. So I called in my wiser and more articulate colleague, Mr. Lincoln. So please, Dr. Lincoln, so please, you have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dan. And thank you to all the panelists, including Ambassador Alfani and Ambassador Enestrom. A very rich conversation, and I'm left with a very difficult job, which I propose to try and get through rather quickly so as not to delay everybody. I think the very tone of this exchange, which builds on the work that you all have engaged in, which I have not personally been a part of, is revealing in the sense that it speaks to a sense of partnership that I haven't heard in a long history of attending UN and UN-related and civil society meetings. So just to, as an observer from the outside, to share that insight from watching and listening to you. The second point is, you've alluded to it, but we live in very difficult times, and I just think it's important to mark that as our reality, as our starting point. These are whether we are comfortably in our apartments, in our homes, these are very difficult times for many people, and so the sense of urgency and the sense of, it was true before COVID, but the crisis has in a way generated a new reality, and it is our grim starting point, and it also constrains a lot of the issues that we've been discussing today. Ironically, maybe it have fueled consideration of ideas that even 6 months ago, even a year ago, would not really have been given much time or space in the hallways of the UN itself. So I think I would leave you with one main consideration, sort of pulling these strains together. There's a trifecta here as we stand today of three elements. The first is the dialogue, the UN75 dialogue. The second would be the political declaration, now negotiated, about to be formally adopted on the 21st. And the third element would be this follow-up Secretary General's report, which would seek inspiration from the first and guidance from the second, and to chart a path, not a path to a distant future, but a path, the next couple of stones across the stream, particularly given the difficulty of the stream at present juncture. So, I would suggest that those three elements together, interestingly, are our best chance at sustainable change. I, for one, probably like many, started with a position of a little bit of disappointment that we weren't going to be unveiling a grand, UN 2.0 at the 75th birthday. But I've changed my mind on that, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. And I think those three elements come together are our best chance at sustainable change. They balance substance and process in a new way. they chart a path between Big Bang change, which perhaps was unrealistic, and tinkering on the other side. And they are coherent mainly with the two, I would say, broad changes, broad patterns that we have witnessed in the 75 years of the organization. The first is the growth and the scope and the depth and the range of the work of the organization, the number of issues that are dealt with by the organization in multilateralism generally. And the second one would be one that you've made a lot of reference to, which is the growth of the actors, and hence the often mentioned need for greater inclusivity as we go. So going back and taking the UN75 dialogue, Christina mentioned the number of people, the number of dialogues, the fact that it really is interestingly unprecedented to have, it's a small number globally, but to have 1 million people say what they think stands in stark contrast to the events of San Francisco 75 years ago. It's the beginning, it's a beginning, but it's a beginning from the sneak peek that we got from the Secretary General's advisor, Fabrizio Hochschild, the other day. There are some interesting findings there with respect to what we all agree on and what we prioritize across the world. And I'm not sure we've had the benefit of that before. So given COVID as well, the idea of a global conversation now looks somewhat inspired, a remote process that has led us to this point. So I think hopefully inside that the findings of that dialogue are a number of, are the bones of the structure to come, or of the path that can then take shape in the follow-up report. Jeff and Enise have mentioned in particular some of the features and their hopes with respect to both some of the features and the process questions about inclusion and representation that would mark the next stage. I think that those are essential. Turning to the declaration is interesting, I think, because it's unanimously agreed by all governments, and it's been a long time, and it's the only thing on the table that actually is distinguished by that particular feature. That means something today, and I think we have to grab it with both hands. The moment is difficult, partially because multilateralism itself is in such dire straits, and there have been many comments about the inability of states and member states to agree on anything really in a global forum, and this is one thing that has been agreed to. It has the virtue of coalescing, of narrowing the field of endeavor, of our focus. In a way, it takes the current situation and the 17 SDGs and the difficulties that we face at process level and boils it down to 12 areas of priority that you can sort of each place on a continuum between process and substance somewhere. But it helps focus the mind. And I think the main question for me is, can that declaration in turn, I think it was mentioned that Ambassador Einestrom said that it was framed really to speak to the people. And my question now is, can it now be used by the people along the same model of citizen advocacy, of the engagement of youth and civil society broadly? Is this now an instrument to then hold governments accountable? The people themselves, our organizations, to turn around and to use that, say, right, you signed up to this. It's the best thing we have going. You know, what are you doing about it? I know that 12 is a lot of priorities for anybody to hold in their heads and any government, but I think it should be possible, and it at least provides an instrument for that kind of, it's the same movement that has pushed climate change, that is remarkable about climate change, that has provided advances at the level of government, citizen-driven advances at the level of government. Can this sort of be replicated? I think that we come to the report, and the report we'll have to see exactly how the Secretary General and his office, who have done a very good job of outlining the priorities and the challenges to COVID, how they will carry that forward. Precisely what the terms of that report, whether it's a commission, whether it's a study, we'll have to see. I think I would leave you with the 2 points, which is the path forward is coherent with the growth of the depth of the work. in rereading the history of 1945, for example, you find that really the main concern in San Francisco is collective security. That's what most of the discussions were about. And the entire discussion was between 50 delegations of 6 representatives each, which is 300 people. And while in the end it was felt that it was necessary to frame the organization in much wider terms, it was the veto and procedural matters in the council that drew the most attention. 75 years on, that's a remarkable thing to think about. 300 people deciding gave us 75 years worth. That's a medium-sized wedding, and it's unthinkable today from the perspective of the kinds of dialogues and participative processes that we're building. And the last thing I would say is that I wonder if you could put a number on the amount of the work, the percentage of the work of the organization that gets done inside the Security Council today as opposed to outside the Security Council. It would be a fraction. And I think that in a way gives us an indication of the path going forward, which is change comes incrementally, it comes by doing. And there's a lot, as Ambassador Enestroom again mentioned, there's a lot that has already been committed to and that is clear and that needs to continue to be done. In particular, Vision 2030 and the Paris Agreement. And it seems clear that those next couple of stepping stones have to go through or be coherent with those objectives.
Thank you.
I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Josh. And just to offer one final remark before closing, of course, there's gratitude for all of our panelists for joining us this morning. I think we've all learned quite a bit. And just one final thought that I had is essentially that, as these forces for change are gaining in strength, perhaps it's not so surprising that the forces of the status quo are also rising. But our shared destiny is something that increasingly cannot be denied. So then the question is how we can move forward together, allowing all of us, including those currently in power, to see a higher call for justice and nobility in a future form of governance that is grounded in dignity, sustainability, and ethics. And as we increasingly do this, no doubt the process will allow for the fruition of higher orders of collaboration and global governance. And I look forward to working with you all in the future. And thank you once again for spending this short 80 minutes with us this morning, afternoon, or evening. And again, a quick round of gratitude to all of our speakers and to Stimson for helping us host this. I wish you all a wonderful day and good luck in your work, and I will see you as we continue to engage. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.